Alrighty, welcome in everyone to just another edition of Just Another College Football Podcast. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It's Thursday, October 9th, and we got a huge Week 7 on slate. We got a couple of huge games, 3 ranked matchups that we're going to get to. We're going to start with the two main ones. We got Alabama going up to Missouri for a huge SEC matchup. We also got Indiana at Oregon for a massive one over in the Big Ten that will absolutely decide some of the CFP spots at the end of the year. Then we got some Week 7 picks. We got different stuff. We got the Red River Shootout. We got Ohio State, Illinois, the other ranked matchup of the week. The Deep South oldest rivalry, Georgia at Auburn, Michigan, USC, a huge one out there in LA that will possibly decide who's that fourth team from the Big Ten at the end of the year. Then we got a little bit of a whip around. We'll talk about UNC in the drama around Bill Belichick right now. We'll get into a massive Group of 5 matchup on Friday night and a couple other big-time matchups, including A&M and Florida, a massive one that could confirm Florida as what we saw last week, could show that might have just been a one-off performance against Texas. And then we'll finish it off doing my best bets of the weekend, a number of ones that I feel pretty good about. I think it's going to be a weird weekend, so hard to feel too confident, but at the end of the day, feel pretty solid about the picks that I have at the end of the show. But let's go ahead and jump into this. We got two big games as far as I'm concerned. Obviously, Ohio State, Illinois is going to be really fun, but these two, in my mind at the very least, are a cut above, I suppose. And we'll start with Alabama at Missouri. This one goes on at noon. It is going to be Alabama minus about 2.5, 3.5, somewhere around there pretty much all week. Over under at 51.5. This one's going to be really awesome, and it's not something you're used to. Alabama going to Missouri for a top 15 matchup and one of the biggest games of the entire weekend doesn't usually happen, or at least hasn't in the past. And Missouri is officially back to being a really solid program. I think they're 26 of the last 25, or 26. They've won 26 of the last 31 games, under Eli Drinkwitz, and this team might be as good as any he's had. The run game is as good as you're going to find in the entire country, rushing for over 300 yards. You got Bo Pribula playing really confident football. The question becomes, what does that look like if they can't run the ball as effectively? Now, Alabama does rank 70th in the country in rush yards given up per game. That being said, still the best rush defense that Missouri's played. So they have not faced anyone that's really been all that great at stopping the run. Maybe they won't in this game, but it does seem like Alabama's kind of finding their footing in that respect. They did a great job of taking Diego Pavia away last week. Obviously, if Bo Pribula can hold on to the football when he's running, that's going to help a ton here. But at the end of the day, I do think there's an opening here where Alabama's going to bring a little bit more physicality than any team that Missouri's played thus far. Obviously, South Carolina is a great test for them, but I do think there's going to be a little bit more of a leg up, and especially in the back end of this defense, has a lot more playmakers, a lot more guys that can come downhill, make some plays in the run game. So can Missouri get that going? Can they kind of set the pace of this game? Because if they can't, Alabama could hypothetically kind of run away with this thing. But Kevin Coleman, Marquise Johnson, Brady Norfleet, they're going to be massive in this game, not because you have to take attention off the run game. I think you're going to be able to run the football okay one way or the other, but you're going to have to make a couple of big plays in this game. If you don't get a team that's as talented, as physical as Alabama to respect the pass game at least a little bit, you're going to have a problem. There's no doubt about that. And I do think it's one of those games where they've played a lot of really good teams. They haven't necessarily played that great team yet, and Alabama is going to be a massive step up for this Missouri team. And then Alabama and Ty Simpson have been as good as you're going to find in the entire country right now. They're 5th in the country in pass yards per game, but Ty Simpson has 1 pick on the year, looks confident as all get out, and he's one of those guys that I think is not going to stop. He's super efficient, really smart with his feet, always where he needs to be, and rips the ball really confidently. I don't think he's going anywhere. I think he's going to continue to play really good football. Tend to believe he's going to be a first-round pick by the time April rolls around, but that's a discussion for a different day. The big-time question here is Ty Simpson's been incredible. He's also had time to throw, which is the biggest question here. Zion Young and Damon Wilson sit at number 2 and number 3 in the FBS when it comes to pressure rate, and you're going up against two tackles that, while very talented, did struggle early in the season against a Florida State team that has a couple of athletes on the edge and has some dudes on the inside that can really get pushed. So has the offensive line for Alabama kind of found it? Have they found a groove? Are they locked in the way they want to? Obviously, they're still kind of playing around with the 5 that they want out there, have had some injuries to guys like Jaden Roberts that have forced guys like Michael Carroll, the freshman, into a starting position, played incredibly last week. Is he going to be asked to do that again? Is still relatively up for debate. And this offensive line for Alabama, they got to find a way to win. If they do win, I think there's openings on this Missouri backhand. I think there's a number of things that other teams weren't able to do against Missouri because they were giving up so much pressure, or they didn't have a guy like Lenore Sellers for a team like South Carolina. I think there's going to be an opening. If you can hold off these guys just enough, if you can keep this pass rush just at bay, it doesn't have to necessarily be you're dominating them all game, you're rushing for 6.5 yards per game, and Ty Simpson has all the time in the world to throw the ball. It's just got to be enough. You got to be able to hold off Zion Young, hold off Damon Wilson, and just let him make enough plays. You know he's going to make the plays. You know his eyes are going to be in the right spot, and he's going to be able to put the football essentially wherever he wants. But if you can't get after him, it's going to be a long day for the Missouri offense or defense. If Missouri can get after him, this Alabama offense could struggle a lot more than we even thought they were capable of going into this game. There was a lot of different things that they have not necessarily been forced to do because Georgia can't really get after the passer as talented as they are. Vanderbilt couldn't really get after the passer. Missouri absolutely can, and that's going to be the big time question here. How quickly can they get after this team, and can Alabama find a way to hold them off at least enough in this football game? But it's going to be a really fun one. There's no doubt about that. I think the keys to the game are really interesting because you have one of the best pass offenses against one of the best run offenses in the entire country. When you have Missouri, they are really good against the run. They're really good running the football. Can they control the pace of this game, or do you let Alabama's pass offense get going? Because then they could win this game by 14 or 21. It could get really ugly really quickly if you let Ty Simpson get into a groove. Now, if you can control the pace with Ahmad Hardy, with Jamal Roberts, and allow those guys to be the special players that they absolutely are, then you have an opening here. Then you have a place here where you can really do some damage, and Missouri can be the team that's kind of setting the pace. They're always up 7. They're always up 10. They're making Alabama kind of play from behind, and then your defense just has to make one play. It really does define what this game is going to be, and that kind of goes into my second one. Those early drives of the football game. Who wins the first quarter? Is Alabama able to get going with Ty Simpson? Is Missouri able to get a little bit of push on the offensive line? Is Zion Young and Damon Wilson able to get after Ty Simpson early on in this football game? Because I do think that kind of sets what this football game is going to end up being. Alabama has not really been put behind except for in that Florida State game, and it looked a little erratic at times when they were forced into a corner, when they were asked to continuously make plays to come back in that football game. Didn't necessarily go their direction. So can Missouri put the pressure on them early and kind of start fast and put a little bit of onus on the Alabama offense to make some plays through the air, because then they can kind of sit back in coverage and hopefully jump on one of these footballs for Ty Simpson and totally change the game in a moment. And then the Missouri pass offense is massive in this game. It has been good, and I think the question is it good without the run defense or a run offense, or is it good because of the run offense that Missouri has? I tend to lean towards the second one. Now, I do think they have playmakers on the outside. I think Kevin Coleman's going to be a huge player. I think Marquise Johnson is massive for this team. Brady Norfleet's been as good of a tight end as you're going to find in the country thus far. But I think it's going to be one of those things where if Missouri can't make one or two big plays through the air in the first quarter and a half of this football game, I think it's going to be really, really tough to get that offense going the way that you want it to. I do think it's going to be relatively hard to stop either of these offenses. For both these defenses, I think they're good. I don't think they're all the way where they need to be quite yet, and I do think there's going to be a little bit of offense in this game. I can't get it out of my head that Ty Simpson makes enough plays. I think Alabama wins this one 30-27. I think it is as fun of game as you can possibly get. I think Missouri is going to gain a lot of respect in the people that actually watch this game and actually take it in. I think it's going to be a really, really fun one, but I just think Ty Simpson's playing on another level. I think Alabama offensive line is going to do enough. I think those tackles are plenty better than the ones that Missouri has faced thus far. I think there's going to be enough opening here for Alabama to win this game by a little bit. I think it's going to be a fight, and Alabama rolls into Tennessee next week with a lot of confidence, but also a lot of work to do still. But I think it's going to be a huge game. I think Alabama barely gets it done over Missouri on the road. Then you got number 7, Indiana, at number 3, Oregon. Another game that you probably wouldn't have bet 5 years ago was going to be one of the games of the week, maybe the game of the week. But Oregon's favored by 7.5 in this game, over under at 55.5. It's a 3:30 kickoff on CBS. This one's going to be really, really fun. And it's one of those games that I think is getting overlooked because of what Indiana did against an Ohio State or a Notre Dame last year. And I get it to a certain extent. I totally understand that approach, and all these coaches have that talk around them. If you can't beat a top 10 team, you're no good and you're never going to beat a top 10 team. But there's a moment here where Indiana can break through, and Oregon played really good football. There's no doubt about that. But they played a Penn State team that has proven to kind of have a little bit more holes than they thought they were going to. And Indiana probably saw some things in that fourth quarter against Penn State where they're thinking, maybe we can exploit that. Maybe we can go over the top like they did to Devontae Ross to kind of blow that game open for Penn State. They can do that with Omar Cooper. There's no doubt about that. And I think there's going to be an opening in this game where if Indiana's offense can get going, it's going to be really hard to stop Fernando Mendoza and company. Now, for that to happen, they have to run the football. There's nothing Indiana does that does not predicate off the run, whether it's Roman Hemby, Kalen Black, Kobe Martin. All of these guys have to play a huge role. The offensive line's got to play a whole lot better. Now, I think they've been good thus far this season. I think they did a good amount of stuff against Illinois, against Iowa, but this is going to be a different challenge. These are absolute freaks on the other side. And Mateo Uyunglele, Bear Alexander, all of these freaks on the defensive line for Oregon, it's going to be really hard to hang with them. Now, you're going to have to find a way to open up running lanes, because if the run game can't get going, Fernando Mendoza is going to have a tough time in this game, because Tosh Lupoy is going to be able to drop guys in the coverage and make life a little bit tough for the really talented quarterback that can make a name for himself in this football game. I think Indiana this season can just do more offensively. I don't think they were necessarily limited last season with Curtis Rourke, but I think the running ability of Fernando Mendoza is massive. I think his ability to throw off platform is something that's going to be huge in this game, and you have a wide receiver group that continues to get better. Elijah Surratt, Omar Cooper, all of these guys are uniquely elite and can do some really incredible things even against a team like Oregon. And I think you test that back end just a little bit more, because I don't know how much it's really been tested. Until that fourth quarter against Penn State, there wasn't really anyone that was pushing the ball downfield or really testing this defense. Maybe Indiana is the team that can do it with Fernando Mendoza, but the quarterback battle is the biggest talking point. There's no doubt about it. These two quarterbacks have been as efficient as you're going to find in the entire country thus far. They both only have one INT on the season. Both of them are really, I don't want to say really new, but relatively new to what the Big Ten means, what these matchups mean. And it's another top 10 matchup for a guy like Dante Moore. It's another massive matchup for a guy like Fernando Mendoza. And I think it's fair to say one guy's going to get their Heisman campaign kind of shot into the stratosphere on Saturday night. The question is, who is it going to be? Bryant Haynes, the defensive coordinator for Indiana, he's done an incredible job with this team. This will be the toughest test they've faced since Ohio State last year. Feel very confident in that. Lewis Moore and D'Angelo Pons are absolutely massive on the back end. Amari Farrell has had INTs in back-to-back games. There's an opening here. Indiana has an opening to get after Dante Moore just a little bit, force a couple of mistakes where he's not comfortable making them, and then you're put in a position where you're kind of playing with house money. You have a quarterback that's a little bit more flustered than he thought he would be coming into this game. Maybe Michael Kamara is getting after him just a little bit, and then you're looking at up at the scoreboard at the end of the third quarter, and it's tied. And you just need to make one play down the stretch of this football game. I think Indiana has all the ability in the world to do it. Both these quarterbacks completing over 73% of their passes, both only have one INT. I think there's a moment here where which DC can put the other quarterback in just a tough spot first. Who can force that hand first? Who can force that one errant pass, that one aggression where you don't really need it? There is an opening here for one of those football teams. Now, can it be Bryant Haynes? Can it be Tosh Lupoy that kind of wins that battle against these two quarterbacks that have been really, really hard to stop thus far? That's plain and simple. I do think the toughest challenge that they're going to face this year thus far is on the other side of the football. And I don't think Oregon was expecting that. I think they were expecting it to be before the bye week, not after the bye week. But this Indiana team's playing better football than Penn State, plain and simple. And they have a lot of talent as well. It's not necessarily they're losing a ton of talent to a Penn State team, or they're losing a little bit of talent to Oregon. But at the end of the day, I think there's a lot of juice in this Indiana program. I think they've heard a lot of the noise. I think they're going to come out really ready to go. Can Indiana hold off Mateo Uyunglele and company and kind of give Fernando Mendoza a little bit of time to dissect this defense? Kind of the same thing on the other side. Which offensive line can hold up just a little bit? The Oregon offensive line looked great against Penn State. This might be a tougher challenge, weirdly enough, against Bryant Haynes in this defense. But the keys to the game for me are as simple as, can Indiana get after Dante Moore? That's a uniquely talented kid that can do so many incredible things in the pocket and outside the pocket. But Michael Kamara, Tyreek Tucker, all of these guys that can make those plays, that have been able to make those plays throughout this year and can push guys off the spot, can make guys uncomfortable. We saw it against Luke Altmaier in Illinois, but I think this is an opening. I think you have to get after Dante Moore. If you don't, we've seen what happens. He can absolutely pick you apart, and he absolutely will in this game if you give him a little bit of time. Fernando Mendoza's legs is a huge thing to me in this game. I think Oregon's defensive line has an advantage over Indiana's offensive line. I don't know how big that's going to be until we kind of get this game underway, but I think there's going to have to be a huge off-schedule plays from Fernando Mendoza in this game, whether it's a 3rd and 10 where he escapes and runs for 11 yards, or he finds his way out of the pocket after a blown blocking assignment and hits a guy downfield for even 5 or 10 yards or maybe 15. There's going to be an opening here where he's going to have to make plays off schedule because this defensive line's too good not to get home a couple of times. So there's going to be a moment where Fernando Mendoza is forced to make a throw on the run or is forced to make a play with his legs. He's got to be able to make it. And then finally, Curt Cignetti. He's been in this moment a couple of times. Against Ohio State and Notre Dame last year, I don't want to say he cowered away from the moment. I don't think they put on the best performance they could have in those 2 games. I don't think they really played to win as much as they could have late in those football games. And now you're walking into a team that will bury you if you give them the opportunity. That's plain and simple. That has been obvious since Dan Lanning has took over. I don't think Curt Cignetti has talked any trash this week, so there's no worry about crazy Dan Lanning coming out, although that kind of comes with him to every single football game. But at the end of the day, I think there's a moment here where Curt Cignetti can change how he's talked about. He can change how Indiana's talked about, and he can change what this season looks like for the Hoosiers, where it's no longer, they're in a schedule where they're not going to play up to the big-time opponents, but they're going to be able to make some plays against the smaller teams. They're now one of the teams that can compete in the highest level against an Oregon, against an Ohio State, and possibly go to the Big Ten title, possibly go back to the CFP, and then who knows what happens from there. But I think this is going to be a really fun game. I think it's going to go back and forth. I think Indiana is going to earn a little bit more respect than they did maybe last year in these moments. I think Oregon finds a way to make it look a little bit better than it ends up being. I think Indiana loses this one 24-34. I think Oregon probably scores a touchdown, maybe about 3 or 4 minutes left in this game. Makes it look a little bit wider than it was really throughout the game, but I do think Oregon's able to win this one. I think they have a killer instinct that cannot be denied. I think Dante Moore's ability to kind of just keep his heartbeat steady throughout these games is something that is impossible to quantify, especially with these young quarterbacks. And I think there's going to be a moment here where Oregon just looks a little bit cut above Indiana. Not necessarily by a ton. I think Indiana will earn some respect on Saturday, but I think there's a moment here where Oregon just makes that one big play late in this football game, goes up by 10, and Indiana just kind of forcing it at the end. So I'm going to take Oregon to win that one. I'm going to take Alabama to edge out Missouri at the very end of that game. I think it's going to be an incredible duo. There's no doubt about that. I think these are 2 games to start your Saturday that are going to be really, really fun. And then it kind of makes way for a Saturday night that might be a little bit more quiet, but has enough of those upset potential that it's going to get a little bit weird. I can almost promise you that. But let's go ahead and take a break here. When we come back, we got a couple of conference matchups. We got Ohio State, Illinois, the Red River Shootout. We got Georgia, Auburn, a number of big-time games that we'll pick right after this, so stick with us. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about the 2 biggest games of the weekend. Alabama at Missouri. We have Indiana at Oregon. I'm going to take Alabama. I'm going to take Oregon by a hair in really both those games. I think they're going to come down to the wire. I think Oregon makes it look a little bit better, but I think both those games are going to be as fun as can be. And both those other teams, Indiana and Missouri, are going to earn a little bit more respect even in losses. And now we got some conference battles that are going to be really, really fun to watch. And we'll start with the other ranked matchup that's going on in the Big Ten this upcoming weekend. That is number 1 Ohio State at number 17 Illinois. This is one a lot of people are watching pretty closely. And it's not necessarily to say Illinois has a great chance to win this game, all due respect to the Illini. But I think there's an opening here where maybe Ohio State looks a little bit more mortal than they have in the first couple of weeks. Maybe Ohio State shows a couple more holes than they have in the first couple of weeks, and we look up at the end of it, and Illinois kept this one close. I don't necessarily think Illinois is going to be able to win this one. We'll get to my official pick here in a second, but Luke Altmaier has been playing as good a football as any quarterback in the country. If you've been watching closely, this guy's been absolutely dealing. This offense has been as explosive as you're going to find in the entire country, especially in the Big Ten. But I think this is one of those games where you're going to need Luke Altmaier to play perfect. Pretty much perfect at the very least. I think this Ohio State front end is absolutely nightmare fuel. I think there's going to be a couple of moments in this game where he's going to either have to put it in his pocket and take a sack or throw the ball away or do something that isn't quite as flashy as you'd like it to be, but against this Ohio State defense, it might very well be a win. I think there's an opening here where you're going to have to find plays downfield. If you can't, I don't know how well you're going to hold up against this defense. I think it's going to be a nightmare for you all afternoon if you're not able to find a couple big plays, especially early in this game. But the big time question here is, can the Illinois defense hold up even a little bit? They obviously didn't against Indiana. They kind of got rolled in that football game, and now you play a team that just continues to slowly open this offense up. I think they're going to do it quite a bit in this one. I think Julian Sain has the game that puts him on the map just a little bit. I think he rips the ball around. And I think Ohio State puts up 31. I think they win 31-14 in this football game. I worry about the Illinois offense or defense, and I think there's a moment here where Ohio State just sits back and says, we have a little bit of opening. There's a moment to get Julian Sain confident. There's a moment to kind of thrust him into the top of the conversation around quarterbacks in college football. I think they take that chance, and I think Julian Sain rises to the occasion. I think Ohio State rolls in this one and continues to prove that they're the top team in the country. The Red River Shootout, the game that a lot of people are confused about throughout this week for a number of different reasons, mainly the line of this game. Now, it has come all the way down to Oklahoma being favored by 1.5. It started at Texas favored by 3.5, I believe, at the opening of the week, has kind of made its way down and across that line, all the way to Oklahoma being favored. And it sounds like John Mateer is going to be back. It is all kind of up in the air. Obviously, Brent Venables isn't going to tell you anything before they officially kick off. But at the end of the day, I think he's going to be able to go. I don't know what that looks like. And that's the big time question here. What does he look like in this football game? Because as bad as Texas has been on the offensive side of the ball and as poor as that defense did play last week, this Oklahoma team doesn't have a Jaden Ball. They don't have a guy that can make 3 guys miss in the backfield and then find his way for 15 yards. They also don't have the offensive line that Florida had. So I do think there's an opening here where Texas can slow down the run game for Oklahoma, put a lot of the onus on Michael Hawkins or an injured John Mateer, and then you're looking at an opening here. You're looking at a way to win this game defensively in some respects. And now the other talking point that is going to be kind of beaten to death in the pregame show for good reason in some respects is the Texas offensive line is a problem. They gave up 35 pressures to Florida last week. Florida had 35 pressures in their first 4 games. So it's a problem. There's no two ways about that. There is something going on with that offensive line that they have to figure out. They have to get Arch Manning comfortable. I talked about it on Tuesday. I think there's a lot of energy being pushed his direction because of the last name, and I totally get that. He is far from the biggest issue with that offense. I can tell you that right now, and obviously the Athletic does the reporting they're going to do, I suppose. But at the end of the day, this kid is not playing nearly as bad as he is getting credit for. Here's the reality. If the offensive line for Texas plays at the level they did last week, I don't know if this is going to get over 10 points for the Texas offense. I think it's going to get really ugly. I think Arch Manning might not even finish this game because the defensive line for Oklahoma is as nasty as you're going to find in the entire country. You have R. Mason Thomas. You have David Stone. You have Jaden Jackson. It's going to be a nightmare if you can't find a way to put your quarterback in winning situations, put your offensive line in winning situations, because they're not going to be a dominant group. They're not going to totally hold up against this Oklahoma defensive line. Can you do enough to get the ball out of Arch Manning's hands fast, get the ball to your playmakers in, hope they can finally make plays? They haven't really all year, but maybe you find an opening in this game. Maybe they make a couple of plays and the juices get flowing for this football team. Now, I don't think it's going to be an offensive clinic by either of these squads really, but I think there's an opening for both of them to make a couple of plays and that be the difference in this game. But one of the bigger things is John Mateer. We talked about how close to 100% he's going to be. The big reason that matters is I don't know if Oklahoma is able to run the ball without him or without their quarterback in general. So the question is he close to 100%? Do they feel confident running him the amount they ran him against Michigan, the amount they ran him against Auburn? I'd be a little bit surprised. So that's going to be an interesting thing to watch. Is Oklahoma's offensive line just put in kind of a tough spot because they don't have the quarterback run to go along with everything else? Or is John Mateer at 80% and they don't feel confident throwing them out there because they think they need the quarterback run? It's all going to be up for debate. Now, I would say an 80% John Mateer is a whole lot better than 100% Michael Hawkins, with all due respect, but I do think this one's going to be really interesting. There is not a game at Red River that's not a little bit weird. Now, it could be weird for a number of different reasons. It could be Texas dominating, it could be Oklahoma dominating, it could be a really ugly game, and it comes down to a couple of plays defensively or offensively. It's going to get weird. I can almost promise you that. I can't trust the Texas offensive line against this Oklahoma defensive line. I just can't do it. I'm going to take Oklahoma to win this one 20-13. I don't think it looks pretty on either offensive side, regardless of the quarterback that Oklahoma has. I don't think it's going to look all that pretty from either offense, but I'm not picking for that offensive line over at Texas right now. It's been absolutely terrible, and this Oklahoma defensive line is very well maybe the best in the country. So I'm going to take Oklahoma to win this one 20-13, and a lot of questions to be asked around Texas on Monday or Sunday morning. This is a huge one. The Deep South's oldest rivalry, number 10 Georgia on the road at Auburn. Georgia favored by 3.5, over under at 46.5. It's a night kickoff in Jordan-Hare, and I think it's going to get really, really interesting because Georgia walks into Auburn this week. They get Ole Miss coming up next week, and Hugh Freeze needs this one. If Hugh Freeze loses this game, I think it's kind of a ticking clock. I think there's going to be a change made there at some point this season. The question is it mid-season? Is it at the end of the season? One thing I can promise you is if he does fall, if he loses this game and Hugh Freeze is out of there quickly, this will be one of the biggest rosters to talk about when it comes portal time. I can absolutely promise you that. With the playmakers they have on the outside, with even the quarterback they have, although I don't think he's getting another SEC offer, I think there's a lot of different players on this football team that could find their way somewhere else in the SEC, outside of the SEC next year, if they did fall in this game, or if they were able to find a way to kind of salvage this. Then maybe Auburn's turning the corner at the end of the season that we did not expect right now. But this is going to be really interesting because the Georgia pass rush has not been very good. They have not gotten after quarterbacks. That's why Ty Simpson kind of tore them up on third down. Not to say Jackson Arnold's going to do what Ty Simpson did by any means. Those wide receivers can make life miserable for you in a hurry. They can make a number of plays on the outside, and if Jackson Arnold puts it close to Cam Coleman, he's going to go up and make a play. I think this Georgia defense just needs to find a way to get after him. Obviously, they're going to run the quarterback. That's going to be a big-time question. The way they handled Georgia Tech last year was not all that great. Maybe they can tap into some of that for Auburn, but I think this is one of those games that's going to be huge. I think there's so many narratives that probably aren't being talked about too much going into this one. I think Hugh Freeze is really kind of back up against the wall, and I think they're going to fight. I think it's going to be a really, really tough defensive battle. I think Auburn's going to make a couple of big plays down the field. I just got to trust Georgia here. I think Kirby wants to kind of put the nail in the coffin for this Auburn season in some respects. I think Georgia wins this one 24-21. I think they make a field goal to win it. I don't think it's pretty at all. I think Georgia walks away feeling like they might have gotten away with one, but I'm not going to trust Auburn in close games, and I think this is going to be a close game. So I'm going to take Georgia to win it by 3. I think it's going to be really fun, but Georgia finds a way to win, and Auburn is probably looking for a new head coach here pretty soon. Number 15, Michigan at USC, outside the top 25 for this one, but favored in this matchup. Favored by 2.5, over under at 57.5. This is another night kickoff. This one's huge in so many different ways. Michigan obviously lost that game earlier in the year to Oklahoma, but both these teams are in a position where they win this one, they're looking at the playoff in a really, really real light. Now, USC has a much tougher slate towards the end of the season than Michigan does. Obviously, Michigan gets Ohio State at the end of the year, but USC gets Notre Dame next week. They get Oregon later in the year. They get Washington as well. It is going to be a fight for USC to find their way into the CFP. If they're going to do it, they got to find a way to win this one, plain and simple. And USC's ability to keep Jaden Maiava upright is probably going to be the difference in this one. Michigan's ability to get after them is going to be a huge, huge test, something they haven't really faced. Now, Gabe Jackas got after him a little bit in that Illinois game a couple of weeks ago, no doubt about it. They also gave up 4.9 yards per carry in that game. So the question becomes, can Michigan run the ball, and can they kind of slow down this passing attack for USC? That comes down to Jayshon Barham and Derek Moore, two incredible edge rushers / linebackers, depending on the way you want to look at it, and it is going to be an absolute fight between these two groups. The question I have here is that 9 yards per carry against Illinois, that can turn into 7, 8 yards per carry against Michigan, because Justice Haynes can take 175 yards in a second. Now, is he going to be as bruising as Khalil Mullings was last year? I'd be surprised in some respects, but he can hit home runs. There's no doubt about that. And he can do it multiple times in a game. I don't think USC finds a way to get this one done. I think it's going to be really fun. I think they go back and forth. I think some people walk out of this one showing or realizing just how special Bryce Underwood is. I think he's going to make a number of plays in this game, but I think it comes down to that running game. I think Justice Haynes is just going to be too much for this USC group. I think they get closer. I think they continue to show that they are inching closer to that ultimate goal, but continue to fall just a little bit short against these more physical teams. South Carolina at number 11, LSU. This is a moment for South Carolina. There's no doubt about that. LSU favored by 9.5 in this game, over under at 43.5, which shows you kind of the state of both these offenses. But at the end of the day, this might be the one that South Carolina had circled the most coming into the season, because one kind of got stolen from them last year. If you watch that game, you understand what I'm talking about. That was a bad call. There's no doubt about that. You lose that game by 3, you probably feel like you probably should have won it by 10 with that pick six at the very end of the game that was called back. But at the end of the day, this is a huge one. There's so many different things that can go wrong for South Carolina the rest of the season, mainly because the rest of their SEC schedule is an absolute nightmare. If you haven't seen it, it's 5 straight top 11 matchups. I think about 3 or 4 of those are in the top 5. It's an absolute nightmare for South Carolina the rest of the way. They get LSU, OU, Bama, Ole Miss, A&M. Obviously, some of those can change, but it's going to be really, really tough. And a win this weekend would help a ton. If they go 0-5, I don't think the sky is falling. I don't think Shane Beamer's getting fired. I do think it's a less than ideal season when you're coming in with maybe the most talented quarterback you've had in a very, very long time. Now, he's got to stay on the field, of course, but at the end of the day, this is going to be a very disappointing season. If those games do not go their way, there's an opening here for this one to go your way. LSU's coming off a bye. How healthy is Garrett Nussmeier is the big-time question here, because that offense has not gotten going. The offensive line has really struggled. They haven't been able to run the football, and I don't think Garrett Nussmeier being healthy fixes all those problems. I do think he gives you more an opening, and I think he has the ability to kind of operate even in kind of a weird pocket if he's officially let's say 90%. Let's not even say 100% because I think that's kind of out of the question this year, but let's say he's closer to 100%. He can make enough plays in this game. There's no doubt about that. They have 4 straight top 20 matchups where they get Vandy, A&M, Bama right after this one. It's going to be really, really tough to deal with this game. There's no doubt about that. I think it's going to be really, really fun, actually. I think there's going to be 2 quarterbacks that probably play the best they've played this season. I think they're a little bit healthier than they have been, and I think those offenses are just going to find a little bit of a groove. I don't think it's going to be all that pretty the entire way, but at the end of the day, I think Garrett Nussmeier makes enough plays here. I think LSU wins this one 30-20. I think it's a fun battle. There's no doubt about that. I think Garrett Nussmeier looks the part in this game, and people kind of throw LSU into that Tennessee, into that, let's say, Ole Miss, into that conversation of those teams that could very well be one of those other teams in the SEC. I think we're still trying to figure out who those 4 teams are going to be. I think LSU kind of inserts themselves back into that conversation this weekend with a good win against South Carolina. I think it's going to look really nice, and I think that offense is going to come alive just a little bit. Arizona State on the road at Utah. Utah, not a ranked team, although I probably think they should be. I'll release my top 25 probably later today, but Utah minus 5.5, over under at 48.5. It's a 10:15 kickoff, so get ready to stay up late for this one because it's going to be really, really fun, and it's a massive one in the Big 12. I think people have kind of forgotten about the Big 12 and as a entity in some respects because of how good Texas Tech has been. They've kind of written off every other matchup that doesn't include Texas Tech. I think this is a huge one, and I think this could very well decide who plays Texas Tech in Arlington. And as of this very moment, I think that game could just very well be for a spot in the CFP with the team that loses going home. So it's going to be a huge moment for one of these football teams. Can Arizona State run the football is the biggest question I have going into this one. Raleek Brown has been top 10 running back in the country probably thus far this year, but at the end of the day, you're going to go up against a group that is really, really nasty up front, that has a ton of dudes. Obviously, they're second, I think, in defensive lines to Texas Tech in this conference, but at the end of the day, it is going to be a huge, huge challenge for Arizona State. They invite Texas Tech into town next week, and if you put this game on Sam Leavitt's shoulders, he hasn't necessarily inspired confidence. He's played much better football the last couple of weeks, no doubt about that, but you put it all on his shoulders the way you did against a Mississippi State until late in that football game. you're going to have a tough time. I can almost promise you that. Both teams coming off a bye, both really strong offenses that kind of do it in a little bit different ways, but have that explosive ability with Jordan Tyson on one side, obviously an elite player. Ryan Davis playing really good football on the outside for Utah. I think Utah can do all the stuff that Mississippi State did, but they can also stop the run. I think it's going to be really, really tough for Arizona State to be able to get the run going the way that they want to in this game. I think Sam Levitt makes a couple of mistakes, and Utah gets a huge one, 24-17. I think they pull this one off. They put themselves in a really good position to possibly rematch with Texas Tech at the end of the year in Arlington, and they get a huge one here. I think it's going to be a fun battle, really kind of back and forth offensive and defensive plays in this game, but I think Utah makes enough plays defensively. I think they win this one 24-17, a huge one for the Utes. But it's going to be a really fun weekend. All those games that I just said very well could go the other direction. They are all on the table. Even Red River, as many people will be picking Oklahoma, and for good reason, will be picking Oklahoma. I think there is an opening there where maybe things just get a little bit weird in Dallas, as they have a number of time before. So we will talk about that as it unfolds, of course, but let's get into a little bit of a whip around after this break. We'll talk about the Belichick drama over there at UNC. We'll talk about South Florida, North Texas tomorrow night, which is going to be massive, and a number of other games that we just haven't had a chance to get to right after this, so stick with it. Alrighty, welcome back, everyone. We just talked about some big-time conference matchups. We had Ohio State kind of handling Illinois just a little bit. Oklahoma gets a rock fight of a win against Texas this weekend. I think Michigan gets a massive one out there in LA, and a couple other ones that are going to be huge for the CFP race down the stretch. But let's get into a little Week 7 whip around, a number of games that we got to talk about really quickly. But before we get into the games, we got something to talk about that is going on in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. There's a lot of talk about Bill Belichick right now. I don't know what's going on in Chapel Hill. They have released 2 statements, him and Bubba Cunningham, that were not inspiring. I'll put it that way, at least for the time being. The question is, how does this all end? At least in my opinion. At this point, it's just how does it all go down, not does it go down. I think it's going to happen at some point this season. UNC is investigating different recruiting violations around the team. Bill Belichick apparently has come to the Board of Trustees, has come to the athletic director and the president and said he might be willing to pay the $1 million buyout to find a place to land with another team or on media. Obviously, that would not be difficult for Bill Belichick to pull off if he was to leave the coaching world, but it's been bad. And a number of things have gone poorly over there. It doesn't sound like the staff is really kind of connected right now in some respects. It sounds like a lot of guys have lost track of Bill in some respects over the bye week. It has not been going well. It's pretty much the long and short of that. I think it's coming to an end this year. I think I talked about it, I believe, on Tuesday. I think we're heading towards UNC being kind of a trivia question. At the end of the year, Bill Belichick, where did he coach in 2025? And everyone's going to be wondering what it is. I think it's going to that territory. It has been bad from the jump. I don't think it's getting better. I think they're going to lose a number of games. And at the end of the year, he's going to find his way out one way or another. The UNC is going to find their way out one way or another. It's been messy from the jump, and it's not getting prettier by the day. Number 24, South Florida at North Texas. This one's huge. This is a special Friday night game, and when you look at the American right now, it is as interesting of a conference as you're going to find in the entire country. You have South Florida, obviously, getting a lot of the headlines. Memphis, Tulane, being those big-time teams. North Texas played about as good a football as just about anyone in the country. Drew Mestemaker in that passing offense has been as good as any in the country, I think, at this point. USF obviously has had a couple of those big-time wins and is looking to kind of get a little bit of a flag plant in the American. I think this would be a huge win for them to start off everything, kind of move them into that top spot once again, with some huge games against Memphis, against Navy on the coming up later in the year. But I think it's going to be a really fun matchup all the way down the road to the American title. I think this could be a rematch at the very end of the year, but I'm going to take South Florida to kind of control this game, be able to run the football and at least take the ball away once from Drew Mestemaker. I'll take South Florida to win this one, but I think it's a really, really fun one over there in Denton, Texas. Pitt at number 25, Florida State. This one's an interesting one for a number of reasons. Florida State starts the season beating Alabama, feels all the confidence in the world. They've lost the last two to Virginia and Miami. That's one thing. It's a totally other thing to fall to 500, losing to two teams that you probably didn't have circled as losses before the season in Virginia and Pitt. And the question is, you got a new freshman quarterback coming in for Pitt, Mason Heinschel. I hope I got that right. He took over for Eli Holstein last week, and he rolled over Boston College. Went for 323, got 4 passing touchdowns. Eli Holstein actually came up in mop-up duty. That's how ugly that game got. So Pitt's in a really good position now. What does that freshman look like on the road is a big-time question here. There's no doubt about that, but Florida State needs this one really badly. You can't fall to 500 after that big-time win over Bama, and I tend to believe they won't. I think they get to I think they get to the young quarterback enough in this game. I think they attack on the defensive side of the ball, and Florida State does enough to win this game. I think it's going to be relatively close, but I think they find a way to pull this one off and at least move to 4-2, not a 3-3 start for a team that really came out of the gate swinging. Virginia Tech at number 13, Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech favored by 14.5 here. This one's interesting. There's a number of different things that could happen here. Virginia Tech's 2-1 since Brent Pry was let go. They've kind of gotten their offense going just a little bit throughout the last little bit. Kyron Jones has gotten a little bit more confident. Georgia Tech coming off a bye, so you get Haynes King healthy, which is about as important of a thing for this team as anything. Both these teams are going to be running their quarterback quite a bit. I can almost promise you that. But the big-time question here is Virginia Tech's been really good against the run. There's no doubt about that. They've been one of the better teams against the run. The one team that was able to get after them a little bit is West Virginia, and that's going to be probably the best rushing attack you have faced until this game. I think it's going to be a battle for them to face. And then Virginia Tech has given the ball away a couple of times. And Clayton Powell, Amari Harvey, all the guys on the back end for Georgia Tech can make a number of winning plays. So I think Georgia Tech does enough to get this done. I think it's a little bit sketchy at halftime possibly, but they make enough defensive plays in the second half to win this one. Notre Dame continues rolling on with a huge one against NC State this weekend. They're favored by 21.5. This one's really interesting. They try to find their way to 10-2, and they got USC on the horizon. But CJ Bailey's a really good athlete, and he's a guy that can force a lot of issues for you very quickly if you do not make the proper plays in this football game if you're Notre Dame. So I think it's going to be really, really interesting. I think both teams have the ability to put up some points. Here's the problem with NC State. They haven't been able to stop the pass at all. And if CJ Carr is going to play confident in this football game, he is going to pick you apart. I'm just being totally honest. I think this one might get a little bit ugly pretty early. I think Notre Dame's able to open this one up and get a big-time win here. Now, I think it's going to be a little bit of a battle. I think they go back and forth offensively in this game just a little bit, but I think CJ Carr is going to have too many openings to not take advantage, and Notre Dame's able to get a big-time win here. Arkansas at number 12, Tennessee. One of those games that's kind of a little bit overshadowed, but this is a revenge spot for Tennessee. Last year, obviously, went into Fayetteville and had that fourth down that kind of got away from them just a little, got away from Nico just a little bit at the end of the game, but a new Tennessee team in so many different ways going into this game. Kind of a weird game over at Mississippi State where you score 2 defensive touchdowns, you give the ball away a couple of times, you let Mississippi State come back into it, and you win it in overtime, but you definitely walk out of that game with a number of things to fix, especially on the defensive side of the ball, and you got a really athletic Taylor Green coming into town. So those edge rushers are going to be massive in this football game. They got to find a way to keep him at bay just a little bit. Tyree West, Joshua Josephs are going to be huge in this football game just to kind of keep that guy from running wild because he can make all types of plays and he can force all types of problems for you if you're not able to keep him in the pocket. I really like Tennessee. I think they're going to continue to get more healthy, continue to make big-time plays. I think the offense is going to kind of explode in this game the way that a lot of teams have against Arkansas, and I think they're going to slowly get more healthy. Jermod McCoy hopefully coming back for the Bama game, but something to watch over the next week or so. It's going to be a huge game for Tennessee. I think they're just too much offense for Arkansas to keep up with at the end of the day. Florida at number 5, Texas A&M. This is a really interesting one as well for a number of reasons, mainly because is the Florida that we got last week the Florida that we're getting going forward? Because if that's the case, this team can do a lot of damage to the SEC that they're probably not making the playoff. They're almost definitely not making the playoff. I feel pretty confident saying that. But at the end of the day, if that's the Florida that we get going forward, they can mess up A&M season. They can mess up an Alabama season or LSU or some team down the road. Obviously, they already lost LSU, but a couple of teams down the road that they're playing. Georgia absolutely is a team that they can really compete with if they're able to continue just leaning on Jaden Baugh. Jaden Baugh is your best player on your football team. He is as talented of a running back as just about anyone not named Ahmad Hardy in this conference. He is going to be a nightmare to deal with, plain and simple. And I think there's going to be an opening here where can Florida State or Florida just lean on them just a little bit? Because that Texas offensive line or defensive line, really struggled against this group. A&M's been a little bit better against the run since the first week. This will be by far their biggest challenge. There's no doubt about that. And I think this is going to be a group when Jaden Baugh and that running attack that could force some issues. And then can DJ Lagway have a little bit of time? Because this Texas A&M pass rush with Cassius Howell has been absolutely nasty. I think it's going to be really fun. I think they go back and forth just a little bit. Can you give Marcel Reed time? Because this Florida State defensive line got after Texas offensive line. Now it's a much better group for Texas A&M, at least on paper right now. So I think this one's going to go back and forth a little bit. I think A&M just has too much offensively to get this one. I think it's going to be a lot of big plays downfield. I think DJ Lagway makes a couple of plays that make us feel confident in him moving forward, but I don't think it's going to be enough. I think A&M's got the run game to win this one. I think they make a couple of plays downfield, and A&M, the Aggies, are able to continue to roll on to a possible SEC title and definite CFP berth. Kansas at number 9, Texas Tech. Texas Tech favored by 14.5 in this game. Their kind of death march through the Big 12 continues. They got a new logo coming in next year, so that'll be an interesting thing to watch. A lot of hysteria around that logo, but at the end of the day, this is going to be really interesting because Kansas has an ability here. They have an opening here where you have a Texas Tech team that's come off 2 really intense wins over Utah and then at Houston, where a lot of people, including myself, were questioning their ability to totally blow out that team. They've done both those things. They have at Arizona State next week. There's an opening here, and Jalen Daniels can do so many things off schedule that maybe he can hold that defensive line just a little bit longer than they have in the rest of the matchups. Maybe David Bailey doesn't get after him every single snap the way he seemingly has for every single Big 12 matchup thus far. I think Texas Tech is able to win this one. I think it's going to be a little bit closer. I think some people see a couple of chinks in the armor for Texas Tech by the end of the year. I think it's one of those games that just you catch someone sleeping just a little bit in the first half. I don't necessarily think Texas Tech's going to look terrible in this game, but I do think there's going to be enough of an opening where we have maybe a 10-point Texas Tech win at the end of this one, not a 25-point the way that we've had early on in the Big 12 schedule. Finally, number 18 BYU outside top 25 Arizona, a very interesting team in Arizona who's done a number of nice things as they've gotten into Big 12 play, have taken a little bit of step back, especially offensively. But this is going to be a really interesting one. There's no doubt about that. It's going to be one of those teams that you probably haven't watched too much in BYU, and makes some sense. There haven't been those major marquee matchups for the Cougars quite yet, but Bear Bachmeier has been playing really good football for them. The true freshman quarterback, very tough kid that can make all types of throws, very talented. They're going on the road for a very interesting matchup against Noah Fafita in the Arizona offense that is sort of finding a groove, has kind of fallen into a little bit of a lull with the conference performances, but is a little bit hit or miss at times. Either Noah Fafita is making a big play downfield or they're getting a little bit hung up. They're going 3 and out. They're turning over the football. It looks a little bit all over the place. So it's going to be really interesting to see what they can do against a BYU team that is just steady as can be. They have been since last year. They continue to be that. They make all the right plays. They win the margins the way that a lot of teams, especially now in college football, just don't. I think this is one of those moments where the BYU defense steps up in a big-time way. They make enough plays, and Bear Bachmeier maybe doesn't play his best football on Saturday night, but they do enough to win this game. Arizona continues to kind of tumble just a little bit in conference play, and BYU continues to be one of those teams that you're just watching out of the corner of your eye in the Big 12 because they could wreak a lot of havoc later in the season. But I think it's a really fun slate of games. There's so many games that you have those marquee matchups. You have the 3 ranked matchups, of course, and then you have those USC Michigan. You have Texas Oklahoma. You have Arizona State Utah that can just be so important when you talk about the CFP race down the road. And then you just got chaos the rest of the way. You got Pitt at Florida State. Absolutely could be a Pitt win. Virginia Tech upsets Georgia Tech and totally changes the ACC. There's a number of things that can happen this upcoming weekend. Maybe Florida continues to hold serve and continues to kind of surge as a football team. And then you're looking up as them as a possible, I don't want to say CFP team, but a possible team that could mess up a whole lot of other CFP teams the rest of the way. So I think it's going to be really fun. I think it's one of those weekends that we know going in it's going to be crazy, and it might even exceed expectations even with that. But we'll talk about it all as it unfolds. Let's get to our last segment here in a second. We'll get into my best bets for this upcoming weekend. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about all the other games. We didn't have a chance to get to a number of really interesting ones, including some ones that could take people by surprise. And I feel like one of the ones we just talked about is going to. I don't know where it's going to come from. Maybe Pitt, Florida State, maybe Virginia Tech, Georgia Tech, maybe Florida A&M. There's enough openings there for something crazy to happen. I have to imagine something crazy is going to happen in this one. But let's get into my best bets. There's a number of games this weekend that I feel really confident about. One that I'm kind of just riding a wave on, if I'm being totally honest, and a couple other ones that I think are going to absolutely hit in some respects. But let's go ahead and get into this, and let's start on the Friday night. Washington-Rutgers over 59.5. This one's really interesting. Rutgers has hit every over this season. Thus far this season, it's gone up every single week. They've hit it every single week, and their defense has plenty to do with that in some respects. They go all the way across the country to Washington. A lot of people up in the Big Ten, I don't want to say blaming travel, but using travel just a little bit too much as a reasoning for losing. I hate it, but at the end of the day, I think it's going to be really interesting. I think the Washington offense has kind of a field day in this one. They go back home, they get a little bit more comfortable. They didn't get going in that Maryland game until very late. I think they're going to get going pretty quickly in this one. I think it goes a little bit back and forth. I think Rutgers sticks around for the first half, and then the Washington offense does enough. But I think Washington could help us out a lot here. I think they could score 35, 38 points in this game, and Rutgers does enough to get us over that 60 mark. But I think it's going to be a really fun game, and I think these two teams kind of go back and forth throughout it. I got Pitt plus 10.5 against Florida State. Mason Heinschel is a very interesting quarterback. And I think there's a thing about freshman quarterbacks that continues to happen, and it's something that can't really be explained. And it doesn't happen to every young quarterback, of course. But going on the road, you don't know what you don't know. You're not nervous when you are not as nervous, I should say, when you just haven't been in that moment. You don't know what to expect. You kind of just go out and play football. And it's something that I think they're going to be able to do in this football game. Now, I don't know how pretty it'll be all the way throughout it, but the Florida State offense is a little bit up for debate as well. And Pitt's been able to slow some of the rushing attacks they've played this year. Can they slow down Thomas Castellanos is the big time question, but I tend to believe they're going to be able to do enough. I think Florida State wins this one, but I think it's really close, and I think there are some people tuning in late in this fourth quarter to just see if Florida State falls to 500 this season. I think they're able to pull it off, but I'm going to take Pitt plus 10.5 with the true freshman quarterback showing out just a little bit down there in Tallahassee. I'm going to take UCLA plus 8.5 against Michigan State. It's maybe dumb. I'm not arguing that. It's maybe dumb to take a team that had that emotional win, maybe is playing down just a little bit this upcoming week, isn't quite on the same wavelength that they were a week ago. I get all that. I'm going to be influenced by the Jerry Neuheisel movement. I believe that this is going to be a thing that we don't look back on as a one-off. We don't look back on as a crazy story that happened halfway through the college football season and was kind of lost to the ether. I think there's enough of an opening. I think there's enough of an offensive identity moving forward for them to score. I don't necessarily think they're going to be able to stop people defensively, but I think they're going to be able to put enough points to stay in this football game. I think it's one of those games that goes back and forth pretty much the entirety of the time. I think Michigan State's good defensively. I think Nico Imaliov is playing as good a football as I've seen him play, and if he's playing confident, he can do a lot of really special things. I think UCLA scores in this one. I think they stay in this one. Maybe they don't get a win on the road at Michigan State, but I think they find a way to keep this one close, and if I'm wrong, then at least I'm wrong riding Jerry Neuheisel and company. Indiana-Oregon over 55.5 is one that I just think these two quarterbacks are special. I really do. I think they're both top 20, top 15 picks in the NFL draft upcoming, and I think both these guys are going to do some really incredible things against defenses that I think are really good. I really do. I think both these defenses have all the talent in the world, have the ability to shut down a lot of different teams. I also think the back end for Indiana is plenty talented. I think there's an opening here for both these offenses to get going. I think if Dante Moore doesn't get pressured, it's going to be really hard to slow him down. And I think Fernando Mendoza, I think there's an opening against the back end against Oregon. I think it's really good. I don't think it was tested against Penn State the same way Indiana can. I think they can emulate a number of the things that Penn State was able to do in that football game. And I think they're going to be able to score enough. I think we have some fun here. I think they go back and forth, and I think people look up at the end of this one and say, Indiana put up a fight. There's no doubt about that in this football game, and that offense looks a little bit more potent than some people might have expected coming into this season. Iowa State, minus 2.5 over Colorado. This is a really interesting one. Iowa State took a punch last week on the road at Cincinnati, and now they got to go to Colorado, and they got to face a Caden Salter who is kind of finding a groove. It's a very interesting team up there in Boulder where they're playing around with the quarterback a lot. The offensive line is still a question. The run game is still relatively non-existent in some respects, but they're finding a way to keep these games close. They're finding a way to fight in a lot of these things. I just think Iowa State's going to be able to run the ball. I don't think Caden Salter is going to be able to do much of anything, especially run the football in this game. I think Iowa State's able to control the pace pretty much from start to finish. Obviously, wanted to give a quick shout out to Deion Sanders going through some different health complications right now. Still finding a way to be around football. This dude loves this game so much, wants to be around it, wants to be around these kids and help them, continue their journey in football. Really incredible thing to watch. I think it's one of those things where this weekend is just too many different things going on around Colorado and Iowa State playing too confident of football right now, especially offensively, to get this one done. So I'm going to take Iowa State to at least win this one by 3 points. NC State, Notre Dame over 60.5. I think Notre Dame's going to do a lot of the heavy lifting here. I'll just be totally honest. I think CJ Carr is going to have an afternoon. I think Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price do Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price things throughout this football game, and I just think Notre Dame scores maybe 49 points, maybe 56 points, and really helps out this total quite a bit. I think NC State does enough to help us out over that 60.5, maybe scores 14, 17, something like that, but at the end of the day, I think Notre Dame's going to do a lot of the heavy lifting here. I think maybe it looks a little bit like that Notre Dame result against Arkansas where just a lot in one direction, but you hit that over because the other team does just enough offensively where they score 10 or 14 points to get us over that 60.5. But I think Notre Dame rolls in this one, and I think that offense does plenty of work to get over 60.5 here. Nebraska minus 6.5 over Maryland. This one's really interesting. Maryland coming off that very tough one against Washington. Obviously, Nebraska kind of rolling, a little bit under the radar, Nebraska right about now. Obviously, you lose that game to Michigan, doesn't help by any means, but Dylan Harrell is playing really confident football. Now, he's probably got to play a little bit better. I think that offense in general has probably got to play a little bit better moving forward, but I think there's enough openings here, and I think the defense for Nebraska can make Malik Washington think a little bit too much. And that's something that happened late on that game against Washington, has happened a couple of times for Malik Washington, really young quarterbacks across the country thus far this year. I think this is one too big a step of a challenge for the young quarterback, I should say. I think Maryland's really struggled against the pass. If Dylan Harrell has time to throw the football, he is going to tear you apart. I feel really confident in that. I think Nebraska is able to win this one. I think they win at least by a touchdown, and Maryland kind of slowly starts to come back down to earth after a true collapse against Washington. And then finally, TCU minus 1.5 over Kansas State. I picked against Kansas State a number of times the last couple of weeks, and I've been wrong a lot. I feel like this is just the game where it happens. Kansas State's been a little bit all over the place the last couple of weeks, has fought a lot harder the last couple of weeks, but has fallen short against Baylor, has fallen short against a couple of teams in the Big 12 thus far. I think TCU's a little angry about how last week finished. They obviously turned over the ball twice late in that football game. I don't want to say hand the game to Arizona State, but at the end of the day, give Arizona State the opening to go take it, and I think this is one of those games where they come out rolling. I think they're able to run the football, which they haven't really done the entirety of the year, and if that's the case, Josh Hoover's going to have a huge day. He's going to be able to do kind of whatever he wants because he has the time, he has the opening, he has all of the things he could possibly need to kind of dice up this defense just a little bit. So I think it's going to be a fun one. I think Kansas State is fighting a lot harder lately, so I think this is going to be a little bit back and forth offensively, but I think TCU just has enough dudes defensively, and Josh Hoover is going to have plenty of time to operate this offense on Saturday. So I'll take TCU minus 1.5 there, and hopefully those will go a little bit better than last week. I believe I went 3-5 last week if I'm not mistaken. We'll check that obviously going into next week, and we'll hopefully find our way over 500 this week, continue to roll towards the end of the season because we're almost halfway home. As crazy as that sounds, we're about to head into the halfway point of this college football season, and I don't know a whole lot. And I think we're going to learn a whole lot this upcoming weekend. We're going to learn how real that Florida performance was. We're going to learn, is Missouri one of those fringe playoff teams or a real contender for the national title? Same thing with Indiana. We're going to figure out how good Oregon and Ohio State are compared to everyone else. We're going to find out, is Texas have any shot of turning this thing around with Arch Manning, or is it a 7-5 season in Austin here pretty soon? So a lot on the table this upcoming weekend, a lot of things that will change, a lot of upsets that feel like they're going to happen or they could happen by the end of the afternoon, and then we're looking up trying to figure out what the SEC and the Big Ten look like at the end of it. I can't promise it's going to be very easy to decipher, but we'll do our best. On Sunday night, we'll do our best to get an idea of what we're looking at the rest of the season, get an idea of who was able to kind of set some statements this upcoming weekend, because there is a number of moments where they possibly could. And we'll talk about it all on Sunday night. Thank you so much for tuning in to just another edition of Just Another College Football Podcast. Please do like, comment, subscribe. It means the world to me, helps me out a ton over here. We got a huge weekend coming up. Enjoy it all, take it all in, and at some point on Sunday, we will absolutely break it down and we will get into the craziness that I'm sure is going to unfold. But thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you guys on Sunday.